Declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political lands of another people and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these traits to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed with their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted from the just powers and the consent of the governed, and that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish them, and to institute a new government. That is your Declaration of Independence. The Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and provide for common defense, and promote the general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for redress of grievances. These are your Bill of Rights. Protect them, treasure them, and stand up for them. Well, it is an absolute honor to be here today among so many lovely people out west. I never thought I would get this far out west, but I must say when the Army of the West came marching by my little house near Lafayette Square in the year of 1846, and they bowed to me, and I waved them on. They were heading to New Mexico for the great Mexican-American War. Hard to believe that was so many years ago, but of course I went through 11 presidents in this United States of America. That was only one of 11. That was President Polk. And my young girlhood, oh, when I look back at my young girlhood, growing up as a Quaker girl there in Virginia, but having been born, of course, in North Carolina. Do any of you know that I was born in North Carolina and not in Virginia, the land of presidents? No one knew that. Well, that's just as well, because I consider Virginia my home. Well, you are so lovely today. It feels like my Wednesday evening squeezes. But I would invite everyone to the White House for a little repast and something to drink, and of course my hospitality. I wanted everyone in America to feel free to come to the White House, because the White House is your house, not just the President's house. And I was delighted when everyone came to see me, as well as my wonderful husband, President Madison. Well, when I look back on my life, and I realized that once upon a time, I was a young girl growing up there in Virginia, having only lived a few months of my life in North Carolina. Not that I discount them at all, because today they do have a magnificent museum for me there in Greensboro with many artifacts that I used to own in life, including that beautiful burgundy dress there. I borrowed it for today just for you to see it. And it has a story, of course. Well, I always said to friends and family, I said there is a secret in life that is better than a fortune teller. Better than a fortune teller can ever reveal. We all have a great hand in the forming of our destiny. And growing up with 8 children in our family, my father John Todd, and my mother Mary Coles, they were Quakers. And being a Quaker, as a young girl, of course, there was a great deal of discipline, but there was also a great deal of freedom. Are there any young children here today? Because this was my little Quaker hat that I used to wear. And, oh, well, you're all children in my opinion. But this little Quaker hat, I'm going to put it on you, darling, because I think you would look lovely in it. This is what you do. She does look so pretty. This is what we used to wear, and our clothing, of course, had no buttons, no zippers. Of course, that wasn't invented yet. We had pins to keep our clothing together, and the most plain clothing you can imagine. And my father was a true disciplinarian, to say the least. And every time we went to the meeting house, we would sit in the meeting house, and the men on one side and the women on the other, and I had to be very quiet, which was not the gift that I was given in life. But if God spoke to you and the Holy Spirit came upon you, you, even as a woman, could speak out and say, I do believe that God has told me that we must do such and such, or I do believe the Father God has led me today to say something. But most of the meetings were very quiet, because God only spoke once in a blue moon. So that's the sort of discipline I grew up with, and I worked very hard. As a young girl, though I was a tomboy, I would play with my brothers, riding horses, running after wagons and jumping on the back of the wagon just like they would. And I was very interested in firearms. I'm glad that the Second Amendment still exists for you. The Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights, that is, that you can bear and carry arms. That's so that a government cannot take over and make you peons again, or slaves, or anything else. There's a reason for that being in the Constitution. But at any rate, I wanted to learn to shoot a gun, but my mother was very against that. So I did embroidery and sewing and things of that nature, and was extremely bored by that. But I did learn to go to school. I learned to read and to write with my brother's tutors. And my brother's tutors, oh, they would teach us everything. And you know, young Quaker girls could have an education just like the young boys. We were treated rather equally. That was a great gift of being a Quaker girl. We had much more freedom. But as you see, I do not bow to you. I do not tip my hat to you, because bowing shows civility, or servility, I should say. And that would be like doing it to the Queen or the King, and we are all equal, is what the Quakers said. So we never bowed to anyone, and we never said Mr. or Mrs. You were friend Dolly, or friend James, and that's how we greeted one another. So there was a total equality among ourselves. And we did start out with slaves. I admit my father had slaves, and we were farmers there. And when we moved back to Virginia from my first home in North Carolina, we moved back to Scotchtown. Have any of you been to Scotchtown in the middle of Virginia? It was the home of our wonderful, my second cousin, Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death, he said, one of the greatest elocutionists and orators of his time. At any rate, we lived in his beautiful mansion house, and I loved it so much to be there. And he had a wife, and very sadly his wife was mentally ill, or mentally deranged, and so she was put in the basement, and they gave her a bed, and she had a black nanny to take care of her, and she was treated with great love and great esteem, because Patrick Henry loved his wife. But most mentally ill people, if you were not a Quaker, were tied up with chains and given a bed of straw and taken to Williamsburg to the mental institution, which still stands there today. So I got to know her, but she was a very different lady, and why she was so ill we do not know. Probably too many children. That was one thing we didn't know how to prevent, is having so many, you see. But at any rate, it was wonderful being a young child, growing up as a Quaker, and I did have a love for my country, a love for my God, and of course when I grew up, I gave allegiance to the King of England. And who would that have been? Do you know who the King of England was then? King George III, absolutely. And he, they say, became a little mentally deranged also. So you see, it can happen to the best of families. Well, I always loved clothing and clothing styles, and I remember one of the Quaker ladies said to me, she said that I gave great offense by the shape of my caps and the length of my gown and the shape of my shoes. I have lectured her at length, she said, about all of this. And Dolly smiles while I am talking, and then she falls asleep. I didn't like those kinds of rules, but of course that would change in just a few years. Well, when the year of 1983 came about, and this was when, of course, the United States officially was given the peace treaty from England, and we were officially the United States of America. When that happened, my father let all of his slaves go in the fields, and that was called manumission. And of course, that was something that the Quakers decided to do, just to let all of their slaves go. And that was a wonderful idea. I thought that was absolutely marvelous, but let me tell you, our ability to make money after that suddenly went rather downhill, because Father had started a starch business there in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, and at this time it was the capital of the United States of America. Yes, I'll tell you what, this city, which was a capital, going to be a capital for about 10 years until about 1890, when we moved it all to that swamp town called Washington, D.C. Philadelphia was like the cosmopolitan city of the United States. It was like Paris to us, although most of us have never been to Paris or to London. And all of the clothing, it was so beautiful to me as a young girl. I looked in the windows and I just thought, oh, I would love to dress in high fashion. And I would love to be someone special someday. And as it was, because I did wear my hats a little differently, and my shoes a little differently, although no makeup or anything of that nature, I was called a wet Quaker. That means I took liberties with everything. Well, my father, being a very strong and strict Quaker as he was, going to Quaker meeting houses all the time, when his business started to fail, it affected the entire family, including my mother, my beautiful mother, Mary Coles. And Mary was very distressed by this. I was distressed, and all of my family was distressed, but what could we do? So Mother opened a boarding house. That was the most wonderful thing that ever happened. You know, God has a hand in our destiny, and every little detail of our lives is worked out by the simplest, littlest thing. Because you see, when Mother started the boarding house, she started getting some of the congressmen to stay at the house. And Father went upstairs. He was so depressed because he was read out of the Quakers. And he was disowned, if you will. And he went upstairs to his bedroom. He turned his back to the wall. And for the next 3 years, he would hardly eat or drink anything. And so I remember quietly taking food up to him every day and say, Papa, how are you? I love you. But you know, my father, being a disciplinarian, I never forgot that either. And one day he called me up to his room and he said to me, he said, I want you to marry John Todd. John Todd. I said, but Father, I'm happy not being married. He said, this is what I want thee to do, daughter. Thee and thou, of course, we used all the time. That is what thou must do, and I did what my father asked me to do. I married John Todd. And so when I married John Todd, he was a lawyer and a very wealthy one there in Philadelphia. And on Chestnut Street, my house still stands, the one when I married Mr. Todd. And we had a beautiful home, mahogany furniture, and all the accoutrements that you could ever hope to have. And of course he had slaves too, but he had money. And he gave me a very good life, and after a few years I said to myself, wow, this is a very good life. And we had two little tiny children very quickly in life. William and then little John Payne. And he would eventually become exactly that, a Payne. And so that is they were my family. I was overjoyed when they were there in my life, because I think family is one of the most important things you can have. And I'm sure most of you agree that children are wonderful under those circumstances, of course. And but there was something that happened in the year of 1793. Now mind you, I was about 25 years of age at this point, because I got married at 22. I was rather old for my day and age to marry. And in that year of 1793, the yellow fever took over Philadelphia, and it was disastrous. It was so bad that 5,000 people died there in Philadelphia alone. And so my husband took us to a little village somewhere far away from the city with my two children. My mother and all of her children went there too. And my father had just passed away the year before, so we didn't have to worry about my father anymore. But there we all are, about 25 miles from the city. And my husband came to visit us a couple of times, and in the meantime he lost his mother, my mother-in-law, his father, and my father-in-law. And the next time he said, I come, I will stay with you here until the yellow fever passes. Do you know that there was no cure for yellow fever for 2 centuries? We did not know. It started with a little thing called the mosquito. And you've had mosquito things happen here in your part of the world too, haven't you? Well, we didn't know about that. We thought all kinds of things. We thought, oh, it's those new people coming into town that have brought it or something. We didn't know what caused yellow fever. But when John Todd came back, my husband, he came back very ill. And he said, I must sequester myself in a private room because I'm very ill. And so we said, oh my goodness. And he was into a bedroom by himself. And the very day that John Todd passed away, my precious first child, William, passed away on the same day, also of yellow fever. And oddly enough, I then also got a touch of yellow fever and was sick for about a week or two, but I recovered. So you see, God had still a plan for me, even though I was feeling very alone in the world. I still had my precious little baby boy, little John Payne Todd. And because of that little boy, I'm going to sing a very simple little song for you, because I never in my growing up years got to sing to my children, because singing was considered very satanic, especially to children. So I will sing a simple little cradle song, and then you will know how much I loved my son. All of his life, he was my precious boy. You're a quiet audience today. Now, you can be more joyous if you want. It's night, long night, tuck my baby on the soft down. wonderful invention that happened toward the end of my life. When I was a young girl growing up and going about Virginia and up to Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia, we had carriages everywhere. We also had stagecoaches, and they were mighty uncomfortable indeed. So I traveled mostly by carriage and stagecoach. Not by railroad. But I'm delighted to see the train out there going by and going by. Then going by. I dare say that's how long it took to ratify the Constitution. And of course, if it hadn't been for my future husband, James Madison, oh my, it probably never would have passed, but that was why they have the Bill of Rights. Well, that is what America is about. We are a free people with a free society, and we do business. We have commercial enterprises, and that's what it's all about. Thank goodness. So I don't mind the train at all. Not at all. Well, there I am, singing to my little baby boy, and I held on to him, and I thought, he's my life, he's my joy, he's everything I own. I must take care of this precious boy. But did you know that when a woman lost her husband, when a woman would lose her husband, she had no right to that child at all. I had to get another man to be his foster parent. Isn't that interesting? So, of course, I decided, let's see, who should be my foster child for this baby? And I also did not get to have my husband's fortune unless I fought for it. That I had to hire an attorney, of course. And I thought, who can I hire? Who's the best attorney around here? I know someone from my mother's boarding house, and his name was Aaron Burr. So I hired Aaron Burr, and he was the one who was going to take care of all that nasty paperwork so that my son could be mine, and I could eventually get my inheritance back from not only my husband, but my in-laws as well, because they had expired from the yellow fever. And now I was considered a very well-to-do young widow about town. And they say that when I would step off the curb from my house at Chestnut Street, that all the young men used to come out of their houses and wave at me with their little hankies. Mrs. Todd, Mrs. Todd. You know, it was rather embarrassing. And there was one lady who said, she said, oh my dear, please cover your face. And please know that you are giving offense by all that you do wear. Please, 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 cover your face. Oh, cover your face from those men. She lectured me and lectured me and lectured me about those sorts of things, but I was delighted that I was being noticed. And then one day, one of my cousins walked by, and she was walking with the great little Madison, as he was called, because he was short in stature, but not in mental ability. He was the brightest man in the entire nation. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And he noticed me, and he turned around, and I'll never forget him turning around and looking, you know. And then he bowed because he wasn't a Quaker, he was an Episcopalian, and Episcopalians, they believe that their religion is only for gentlemen, of course. And he tipped his hat at me, and then I got a notice. Would I entertain the great little Madison? And I said, I would be delighted to have him come to my home, and he did. He came to my home, and I know you're all hot. Remember, I don't believe in purgatory, but now I'm beginning to wonder if I should. It is warm in here, and I'm so sorry. But at any rate, if you focus on what I'm saying, the heat will maybe dissipate in your dreams. Mr. Madison, oh, Mr. Madison, what he didn't do. He met me, and they say within an Mr. Madison, my cousin Catherine said, he told me that I might say what I pleased you about him. He thinks so much of you in the day that he has lost his tongue. And at night he dreams of you and starts in his sleep calling on you to relieve his flame, for he burns to such an excess that he will be shortly consumed. And he hopes that your heart will be callous to every other swain but himself. He has consented to everything that I wrote about himself with very sparkling blue eyes. Well, that's the letter she sent to me. And then he started to court me, and for the next 4 months, he courted me and took me about town, always with an escort, ladies, always with an escort. I think a lot of young ladies would not get into trouble today if they had an escort. And one day, he proposed marriage to me through a letter. I suppose it was a hint. Yeah, well, pretty soon it was just in the car. It won't be so noisy. Can you hear me in the back? You can. Wonderful. And so he proposed marriage to me through a letter, and I was in Fredericksburg. I received the letter, and I wrote back and I said I would accept his hand in marriage. I would be delighted to. And he wrote back to me, he says, oh my dear, let us marry as soon as possible. And can you imagine, this was barely a year after I lost my first husband. But I consented because I wanted a good man for my little son, and I wanted security for both of us. And I was quite frankly, maybe a little desirous of being in the society that kept the laws going and the government going. It was a very exciting and tumultuous time in our lives, even though we had wonderful George Washington eventually be our president. This was a very exciting time, you see. And so I said yes, and we were married at my sister's home, which was designed by George Washington. She married his stepson. She married Steptoe Washington, which is his nephew, over there in West Virginia. West Virginia didn't exist at that time. It was near Martha's Ferry. And there was a large group of people there in the house, and Mr. Madison and I pledged our hearts to one another. And that night I wrote a letter. I sat down and I wrote a letter to my best friend, Eliza Collins, who was at both my first wedding and then had liked me at my second wedding. And I wrote to Eliza and I said, my dear, I have stolen from the family to commune with you, to tell you in short that the course of this day I gave my hand to the man who of all others I most admire. In this union I have everything that is soothing and great in prospect. And my little Peyton will have a generous and tender provider. Adieu, adieu, I wrote. Adieu, adieu. It is yet uncertain whether we shall see you before the meeting in Philadelphia, but all families say hello to you, and in this love I give it to you and yours, Dolley Todd. And then in a postscript I wrote, alas, Dolley Madison. Well, our hearts understood each other. Mr. Madison and I were a match made in heaven. I waited on that man with all of my heart and all my soul. I fixed his hair. I read to him. I encouraged him in politics. But after he left the House of Representatives there in Philadelphia, and the year was 1796 or so, he said, I'm not going to do any more politics. I'm retiring to Montpelier. Now, if you have never seen my home in the country, in the county of Orange, the Blue Ridge Mountains are in the distance, and they're very beautiful. They really are. Montpelier is a gem among gems, and it looks very like this little portrait here. And you can see there's a little temple over here that Mr. Madison built. I will walk around the room so you can stare as well as you can to see it. I know it's rather small with you, but it's in the classical Federalist style. And this house, at one time, it was purchased by the DuPonts, And the DuPonts added 55 rooms to this house, yes. And when the last owner, Annie DuPont, died in 1983, she said, I want the house restored to the original Madison house. So they took away all the rooms except the 23 that Mr. Madison and I knew very, very well. Well, when we went back to this house, I was delighted. It was a big plantation, 100 slaves, you know, and 5,000 acres. It was very prosperous. We were farmers. We were planters. And we had company all the time. And his parents lived on the right side of the building, as you see it, and we lived on the left side. So Mr. and Mrs. Madison Sr. had privacy all the time to do whatever. They had their own slaves, their own kitchen, and so forth. And you poor people back here, I will come back here too, so that you can see the beautiful Montpelier. Today it is owned by the National Trust, and they're the ones who restored it. And you have been able to see it since 1986. That house has been happening ever since then. And it is beautiful. You must go there. It is lovely. And the gardens are magnificent. The gardens were created by a Frenchman who was a dear friend of my husband's. And the kitchen is magnificent. I rarely went down there, but I did supervise meals. I must say, I do know how to throw a good party and a good meal. But I don't like to work in the kitchen. Not at all. Not at all. I let others do that. But there you go. That is Montpelier. And so, Annie DuPont had married Randolph Scott, the movie star. So that movie star lived here in my house for a short time. You do know Randolph Scott? Yes. Yes, you do. Of course you do. Well, that was my beautiful home for the next 4 years. I got to know my mother and father-in-law and all the cousins and everyone else. But you know, it was Mr. Adams, who was our second president, of course, after Mr. Washington. It was Mr. Adams who said that political plants mature best in the shade. In other words, my husband, Mr. Madison, would do well to think about his future there in the shade of Montpelier, because he probably will be coming back to Washington, D.C. and being a part of the government, even though he said he wasn't retired at all. Not at all. And it would take several years for him to realize, I have to get back to the government. I have to get back to it. And so he did. And the year was 1801. Who was president in 1801? Does anyone know? Yes, Thomas Jefferson, one of the dearest friends you could ever hope to meet. And he, of course, is a widow, and he had no wife at this point. His beautiful bride had passed away after problems with her last child, which a lot of women went through. So the men oftentimes would remarry. Lucky, lucky for the men, but very sad for the babies. But he told his wife, I will never remarry. That's what he told her. And so that's what he did, and he asked me to be the hostess at the White House. And he said, move in with me. I have enough room for 2 kings, a pope, and the Dalai Lama. And Mr. Madison and I stayed there for several months, but we moved to the F Street, that's F Street house, where we would stay until we became the president and presidentress, as they called me. I didn't ask for that title, but it was conferred on me in the newspapers, you see. Well, there we are at the beautiful city of Washington, D.C., with pigs in the streets, muddy roads, and boundaries that were marked by tree stumps. And there was basically nothing from the White House all the way to the Capitol building. Those were the 2 main buildings that were built there. And they were building others as we went along. But those were the 2 main buildings. There were about 6,000 people living in Washington, D.C., and a third of them were slaves. So that gives you an idea of the demographics of my wonderful city that I would grow up with and it would grow up with me, and they said that I had more of a hand in shaping Washington, D.C. than any other First Lady ever had. But you know, all First Ladies, for that matter, it is opposed to that. Well, let's put it this way. It is a post in life that you are not elected to. You are an unpaid public servant. You are elected by one person only. And who would that be? Yes, your husband. Absolutely. Well, there we were, there in Washington, D.C. And when Mr. Jefferson decided, yes, I would be the hostess for the various events that went on there, and I was quite delighted to do so. But there were attachés coming from, like ambassadors coming from England. We had some from Spain, France, and England. And so the English attachés came to beautiful Washington, D.C., and Mr. and Mrs. Mary. And he said, well, if it was a city, I can't see it. What is this wilderness capital of theirs? He was appalled at all of the pigs in the street and so forth. And yet he came dressed up completely in his diamonds and his jewels, you know, and a wonderful decorative sword on his side. And he came to visit Mr. Jefferson, our president of the moment. And Mr. Jefferson, being a Republican, you know there is a difference between a republic and a democracy. We're not a democracy, we are a republic based on democratic ideals, the United States. But Mr. Madison said, oh, we need to treat them well now. And Mr. Jefferson said, well, I'll show you how to treat them. And he came downstairs in the White House and he greeted Mr. Mary wearing his bathrobe and slippers. Well, talk about an affront, you know. And Mr. Mary wrote home and he says, this is cause for war. Some say that the War of 1812 may have happened because of the events with the Marys. And then when we had a dinner for the Marys to come over, I was the hostess for the evening, and I thought Mr. Jefferson would surely take the arm of Mrs. Mary. That's what he was supposed to do. Instead, he stuck out his arm, and he put my arm on top of his, and we marched into the dining room, and I said, oh, please, take Mrs. Mary. Take Mrs. Mary, not me. But he didn't do it, and so my husband graciously took her into the room, and there's Mr. Mary, all by himself, wandering into the room at the last minute, hoping to find a seat somewhere, because now Jefferson had started something called pell-mell. And pell-mell meant grab any seat you want. It's a free-for-all, and that's how it was for him to be a Republican. So he had a few things to learn. Well, I love Mr. Jefferson, and he loved me. And when we would go and visit him at Montpelier, from Montpelier all the way down to his beautiful home there near Charlottesville, I have to tell you, it took at least 2 days to go down there, of course, but it was wonderful. And he had a very interesting take on women. You know, he did allow me to do quite a bit with him, which I was very proud of, but for the most part, he was very, very strict in how the women were to be treated. Ah, yes. He said, and he spent very little time in the company of women, although we found out later that wasn't quite true, was it? Especially when he went to France and he started an affair with his wife's half-sister. He certainly did not think that women should be involved in politics. In 1780, he wrote, "The tender breasts of ladies were not formed for political convulsions, and the French ladies miscalculate much their own happiness when they wander the true field of their influence into that of politics. But our good ladies," speaking of us ladies here in America, "our good ladies, I trust, have been too wise to wrinkle their foreheads with politics." Obviously, he had never met Hillary Clinton. They are contented, the Americans, to soothe and calm the minds of their husbands returning from political debate. They have the good sense to value domestic happiness above all others. It is a comparison of the French Amazon to the American angel. Well, that was nice what he wrote, but quite frankly, my dear, we didn't have the right to sign a contract, to write a will, to sue in a court of law, whether we were married or single, and we were put into the same category as children, idiots, Indians, and slaves. And that's I am not speaking but a truth about history. This is not being politically correct, obviously. They were judged to be dependents, women, lacking a free will and consequently disqualified from voting. They were a second-hand class. They were not allowed to go to institutions of higher learning. They could not learn a profession, such as medicine or law, and they were never allowed to vote or be in public office. Thus, what does the Dolley Madisons of this world do? Ladies, it's called parlor politics. And that's what I learned to do very, very well, starting with Mr. Jefferson. And you know, at this time, the Federalists, and of course, the Republican Democrats, and that's what Mr. Madison was, a Republican Democrat. Isn't that interesting? They were together at one time. The Republican Democrats and the Federalists. The Federalists, like George Washington and Adams, they were more like, oh, I love the Queen of England, and the way everything in England is done, the way they do it. And the Republican Democrats were just the opposite. They were more for the people, you see. Being equal with the people, that was the important thing. But there were fights in Congress. You think you have fights in Congress. Oh my dears, you've never seen anything until you could see what happened during the Jefferson and Madison reign, or I shouldn't call it a reign, that would be a Federalist idea. You should have gone to the House of Representatives or to the Senate when people like Mr. Randolph would hit someone over the head with a cane. And then once he brought in his hunting dogs and he sicked someone there in the House of Representatives with his hunting dogs. Oh, and the dueling grounds. We believed in duels way back when. Maybe you should start that up again. That's not a bad idea. The dueling grounds were there in Bladensburg, where there would be a little skirmish a little later on in my career with my husband, Bladensburg, Maryland. That's where the great dueling grounds were. And then, of course, Aaron Burr got into it with Mr. Hamilton. And that was not a pretty story at all. Aaron Burr was the vice president to Jefferson at this time. And when Aaron Burr, unfortunately, killed Mr. Hamilton in a duel, it was a great loss for our society. We were so grieved by all of this. And Aaron Burr left the State Department, or the White House, if you will. He left and took off, and he would not be seen for a while, but when he came back, he was a very dangerous man, and I wouldn't even speak to him again, even though he had been my little boy's protector and foster parent for a while, and had helped me as a lawyer. He had turned completely against the American way of doing things, but this is not about Aaron Burr today. And poor Mr. Hamilton, we grieved for him for a very, very long time. Well, there you have it. That's how tumultuous it was in our day and age and how we took care of it, or we tried. And part of politics, that's what I do very well. I go about and I get the Federalists together and I say, come and talk over here with some of the Republican Democrats, and I know you will love talking to my husband. My husband is wonderful. He will talk with you, he will converse with you. And I got Mr. Madison, who was a very quiet man compared to me. Is that a surprise? I would get them both together and they would discuss politics. And so I would ameliorate all the problems that were out there. Any problem? I took care of it. Anyone hurting? I took care of it. And I would wear feathers in my hair, just like I am today. So, you could see me walking about the White House, or wherever I was entertaining at this point before we became the presidentress and the president. we had the house at F Street, and that's where I entertained. And I brought Mrs. Mary over there and Mr. Mary and smoothed things out with them. And I went riding with Mrs. Mary because she wanted nothing to do with Jefferson. Can you imagine why? And so there we were. We became very good friends. So that's how you do it. Back street politics. And you know, a smile on your face and dealing with people graciously takes care of more problems than anything else in the world. And so the day would happen when we were starting to have problems with the British impressing or stealing away our sailors. And they would take them and put them on their British ships to fight the war between Great Britain and France that was going on at that time, stealing our sailors. And then, when we started to say, you can't do that, they said, oh, yes, we can. And they came over, and from Boston all the way down to Charleston, South Carolina, the British would come along there, they would raid plantations and cause more problems than you can imagine. And so, my husband would have to deal with this one. Jefferson left office, and we didn't know what to do, but very soon into the presidency of my husband, I will tell you what we did. But first, for the day that I became Mrs. Madison, the first lady, as they said. My husband was elected unanimously as the President of the United States. In the year of 1809 until 1817, we had 8 glorious more years in the favorite city, my favorite city, Washington, D.C. And so there we were, and on the day of the presidency, when he was inaugurated, if you will, it was in the House of Representatives. And again, everyone was pell-melling it, and I had absolutely no place to sit. So I stood through the whole inauguration, and afterwards, after the bands were played, we were escorted back to our little house at F Street, and we had a reception. And that night, I led the first inaugural ball there in Washington, D.C., at a hotel there. And I dressed up with a white, off-white velvet dress in the Empire style, with a beautiful white turban and feathers, and I wore a pearl necklace because I didn't want to be like a queen, like the Queen of England who would wear diamonds. I wore pearls. That was more American. And our 8 years began with a beautiful time there at the ball. And my husband said to me, all I want to do is go home and go to bed. He did not like to socialize at all. Well, the White House, when I moved in, was totally empty. The drawing rooms, the dining rooms, everything was a mess. There was very little furniture there, and when Mr. Jefferson came there, I know that train was very, very lovely to look at, but if you could, I get mesmerized by it. It's hard to concentrate with that lovely thing going by. But at any rate, when Mr. Jefferson decided to decorate the White House, you can imagine what he did, don't you? He brought everything that Lewis and Clark had found out west. So we have a moose in the dining room. We have a mammoth tooth in the parlor. Oh, it was unbelievable, the junk he brought in. But at any rate, he decorated his furniture from his place there in Charleston. So there we go. Totally different style than I wanted. I didn't want deer on the wall. Some of you have to live with deer on the walls, don't you? Well, I wasn't going to be one of those ladies. So I asked my husband for $25,000. He said, but that's what I make for the year is $25,000. I said, well, that's what I need to decorate the White House. We need to make it the people's home special. And he says, well, I can't give it to you, my dear. So I marched over to Congress, I invited them in for tea, I brought them around all the empty rooms, and I said, see, this is the people's house. Isn't this not happen. And I hired Benjamin Latrobe to come in and decorate with this beautiful classic furniture that looked Roman in style. And it was fabulous. Oh, what beautiful pieces of furniture. One couch has survived, and it's in the White House today. And then, of course, on the wall in the dining room, he said, we must put President Washington's, and he's a president here. He's not a commander of the armies here. President Washington's portrait, this very portrait here, this is a copy, of course, but that portrait was put on the wall in the dining room. I said, what a wonderful place to have our president, and I love George Washington. Let me tell you, had it not been for Mrs. Washington, when I was seeing Mr. Madison, had she not invited me for tea and said to me, Dolley, is it true? Is it true that you are engaged to be married to Mr. Madison? I said, oh, no, that's just a rumor. She said, oh, my dear, if this is true, I guarantee you he will make me a wonderful husband and a great protector. Marry him, my dear, marry him. So, of course, that was the good housekeeping seal of approval. And I did marry him. Yes, I did. So, I love the Washingtons. We would visit them many times at the beautiful home Mount Vernon there in Virginia. So, what am I to do with this beautiful room? I said, oh, I know what I need. Windows like this. I need, oh, Mr. Latrobe, I need red velvet curtains. He said, oh, my dear, that'll cause a ruckus with my career. If everyone walks in here and says that I designed the red velvet, I said I must have red velvet curtains. Then we'll make the room cheerful. And he was so against the red velvet curtains, but I got my way, and the house was beautifully decorated for $27,000, which included a brand new piano and, of course, a guitar. And even though Mr. Madison knew that I grew up without music, I embraced music again for the first time in my life. And there I am in the White House. And one day I said at a party, a wonderful squeeze like today, I said, I want to sing a little song. And so someone sat down at the piano and played this little song. If you don't mind me doing it, I shall do it for you. This is for my Jimmy. 42 years of marriage we've been having together. How I love that. in office, something that you may not realize. Have you heard of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803? Well, Napoleon wasn't doing too well in the war between Great Britain and himself, and so, of course, Mr. Madison said, let's take this opportunity to confiscate some property at 3 cents an acre, doubling the size of the United States of America. And you know, of course, 3/4 of all the people in America at that time, in the 1800s, lived within 50 miles of the Atlantic coast. So now we have New Orleans and the Mississippi River. Oh, we're doing well, aren't we? That is one of his accomplishments. And we both encouraged during Mr. Jefferson's term Lewis and Clark's exploration. I even raised money for them so that they could go west. And when they came back, they gave me all their pots and pans. Oh, joy. I gave them to my French chef there at the White House. We had a French chef, a French gardener. Everything was French in those days. And the Monroes were the one who told us, and of course Jefferson himself, the French style this, the French style that was so wonderful. That's why Mr. Madison had a bill of about $2,000 a month for all of my French gowns, and about $500 just for the feathers alone. So everything was French, you see. So we were doing quite well, but we were still having a problem with the Congress, of course. And you do realize that Mr. Meriwether Lewis was a dear friend of mine. He was Mr. Jefferson's personal secretary before he went on that jaunt clear across the country. Well, my dear friends, so we are now the president and the presidentress. And the rumors started coming out like crazy. They said that, of course, the Federalists hated the Republican Democrats, and they were always saying, well, that woman is oversexed, and she has outsexed her husband. And that's why she has no children by him. That's what they said. And when my sister Anna was living with us, I was always bringing in my sisters and my little nephews and nieces to live with us, and my son John Todd. And they, of course, were involved in it too. They called my sister and I the Merry Wives of Windsor, and that we were having affairs with the ambassadors coming into town and all the Congress. Oh, that would have been exhausting. I barely could do my 1 or 2 soirees, if you will, or drawing rooms every week. I had more important things to do, and of course, how did we communicate then? We wrote letters to everyone. We didn't have the devices that you have today. We didn't have television or cell phones or anything of that nature. We wrote letters. That's how we communicated. I wrote hundreds and hundreds of letters to everyone, and today those letters are there at the University of Virginia, and you can read all 2,000 of them if you want. Well, I still would entertain, and I would ask in the newspapers, I would say, ladies around the country, please send me your favorite recipe, and I shall try it at the White House. And of course, every White House meal, almost every White House meal, had my favorite dessert, and I hope it's yours. Ice cream, of course. And this has been without refrigeration. How did we do it? Oh my word, how did we do it? So those are the kinds of silly things that were going on, and all those newspaper threats about me and saying such terrible things about me. I said to my husband and to my sister Anna, I said, I like rumors, don't you? I find out so much about myself that I didn't even know. But I always said it's one of the sources of happiness to me to desire a knowledge of other people's, not to desire a knowledge of other people's business. I didn't want to know other people's businesses, you know. So I told my family, remember all this nonsense going around that I have been such a naughty girl, or I have unsexed my husband, poor Mr. Madison. I said, please think of it as a play, a delightful play, and just smile when someone criticizes you. Wouldn't that be nice if everyone would do that today? Yes, just a smile. And it was Henry Clay, who was a very dear friend of mine, and he said, everybody loves Mrs. Madison. And I said, that's because Mrs. Madison loves everybody. And that was the truth, absolutely. Well, the impressment of sailors was happening very quickly. 5,000 sailors were put into the British Army. And my husband said, we cannot live with this anymore. And all the retaliation of the Great Britain up and down our coast, we are going to declare war. So June 18th, 1812, we declared war on Great Britain. And the Federalists had a fight about that. They said, oh, that's terrible. Just be pacifistic. Well, Mr. Madison said, no, we can't now. Now we have to stand up for our borders, our country, and everything else. The main mistake my husband had was he didn't believe in a standing army at the time. Thus, when he said, we need to send 5,000 men to fight in Canada, only 1,000 showed up. And, of course, we burned the capital of Toronto, oh dear, and that got us into some trouble. And we started having one failure in war after another. But suddenly, Admiral Perry did very well for us on the Great Lakes. And have you ever seen the Great Constitution or the ship, the old Ironsides in Boston? A magnificent ship. Oh, she did us proud. That ship was magnificent on the high seas, but remember, she was about the only big ship we had. Great Britain had 1,000 ships. We had 20. We were rather outnumbered. To cut my story a little short, because I see some of you are ready for your nap at this point. And I don't blame you whatsoever. It's very warm in here, and I'm sorry about that. If you can survive this, you can survive anything. Well, I tell you, one day, Mr. Armstrong, I should say General Armstrong, but I say that very, very lightly. General Armstrong was the head of the Army, and like all the posts that my husband put out there, he was very weak in deciding a correct cabinet for himself. He was not very good at that. But he was an amazing man in so many other things. He wanted to run this country like the government that he formed, because he was, after all, the father of the Constitution and the framer of the Bill of Rights. So you have to keep that in mind. He didn't want to renege and step on toes and usurp other people's business. Or if the legislature was working, let it work. If the Supreme Court is working, let it work. If the Justice Department is working, let it work. And so when Mr. Madison said, all right, enough is enough, but he said, I did hire this man to protect us in D.C., and General Armstrong said, we don't have to worry about D.C. being taken over. Oh my goodness, no. We're not going to have any problems there whatsoever. Well, I tell you, I beg to differ with you, General Armstrong, because we would have terrible trouble because we had no standing army and no protection there in Washington, D.C. Excuse me. The army of the British, 4,000 strong, came up at Pax. I can't say it all of a sudden. The heat has got to me. Up the river, up to Bladensburg, and up there, they arrived, they unloaded their troops, and they were looking for someone to fight. And we took our few little 500, maybe 1,000 men up there to greet them. And my husband left that day. It was in August. Oh my word, I can't believe it. It was August 1814, the 24th of August, 1814. He says, my dear, will you be safe here at the White House? I said, absolutely. He said, don't come back. I won't come back until I come to get you, so stay here. And so I said I would wait for him. And you know I had absolutely no fear of the British coming in. Nothing bothered me. I put a Tunisian sword under my bed every night. I wasn't worried about anything. And remember, I was brought up a Quaker. You know, one who doesn't fight, and one who doesn't believe in war, and so forth and so on. And so I said, no, my darling, you go off with the troops. He said, I must address the troops there at Bladensburg. And so I said, I will be here. I will hold down the fort. And so that's what I would do. And I had 100 men at that time watching the White House. They wouldn't last very long. They eventually took off too. And they left 14 cannons behind. If that gives you an idea, probably all the cannons we owned was right there in the White House. And my major domo, who was French, she said, I'm going to light those cannons so if the British come into Washington, D.C., and they would dare to come into the White House, I'm going to have it lit so that they all blow up. I said, well, let's hold off on that idea. And so I started writing letters to friends. And I said, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I've got the important papers in all of the carriages, including Mr. Madison's copy of the Constitution of the United States and other important papers. The Declaration of Independence and the original Constitution signed by all of the Senate and the representatives, that was in the hands of the War Department at that time, and they took those documents out right before I would flee from the city itself. So you see, I was thinking ahead here, getting as many important papers, and then I had my bird, Polly. Now, our parrot, Polly, had to go with us too. That was Mr. Madison's best friend, and it was the only friend that would swear in his presence, and where he got those swear words, I have no idea. My husband left me yesterday morning to join General Winder. He inquired anxiously whether I had the courage or the firmness to remain in the President's house until his return on the morrow or the succeeding day. And I told him, do not worry, I will take care of everything. He desires that I should be ready, however, at a moment's notice to enter my carriage and leave the city. I have pressed as many cabinet papers as I possibly can into the trunks and into the carriages, and our private property will have to be sacrificed, unfortunately. I am determined not to go myself until I see Mr. Madison safe, until I see the whites of his eyes. I said, well, I saw something white, but it wasn't his eyes. It was the underwear of the British coming in. But anyway, I am determined not to go myself. So my friends and acquaintances, however, have all deserted me. Oh, I have always been an advocate for fighting, but this is one time where I am very aware of the fact that I need my Tunisian sword. I wrote to Mrs. Benjamin Latrobe. I confess I was so unfeminine as to be free from fear. Oh, 3 o'clock, I wrote my sister, oh dear sister, we've had a little battle or skirmish near Bladensburg, and I'm still here within sound of the cannon. Mr. Madison comes not. May God protect him. 2 messengers covered with dust came to bid me fly, but I still wait for him. And I would go to the attic of the White House and take my little telescope, and I would look around there and say, well, I do see some dust in the distance. I hear lots of cannon, and I do not see Mr. Madison. Where is he? Where is he? And then all of a sudden, I saw the entire American army fleeing from Bladensburg and coming through the city with a roar of dust in every direction. I put up my telescope, and I said, well, I'm still waiting. Thus, I got my parrot ready to go, and I said, we must needs take down the portrait. And so one of my servants, his name was Paul Jennings, he was my husband's manservant, and he would eventually write about his escapades there in the White House years later as a free man. I said, take out the portrait of George Washington. I cannot leave without that portrait. If that portrait is here and the British come in, we are doomed. They will parade that around the London Capitol. And I said, that cannot happen. We must give honor to our President, George Washington. We all were very highly esteemed of him. And so that was, unfortunately, could not be taken out of the frame. So I said, then cut it out. And we rolled it up, and 2 men from New York City came to my door, and I said, can you take this portrait with you when you cross the ferry into Virginia? And they said, we will do that, and they took it to New York City, that portrait, and I said, yes, that's taken care of. That's very, very good. Now, what else must I take? Oh, yes, the red velvet curtains. Take the curtains down, and so Paul Jennings took my big velvet curtains down, and we put them and stuffed them in a trunk, and we put them into one of my carriages, and I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting to see what will happen. And finally, a freed man, a free black man, came to my door and he says, Mrs. Madison, it is time for you to leave. And I thought to myself, well, if General Cockburn of the British Army, or the sailing ships, I should say, he was an admiral, if Cockburn comes in, he said he might capture me and take me and parade me around London as his special little find here in America. I don't want that to happen. And then he said he would burn down the White House around me. I said, I guess we must needs go then. I don't want Cockburn to get his wish granted. So I got into the carriage and we took off for Georgetown on all the bouncy, old, rutted roads, because we had terrible roads in those days. Got there and we stopped at the Davenport House, and today the Davenport House is known for harboring Dolley Madison. They gave me a little bite to eat, they gave me some tea for 5 minutes, but oh, have they made history. They make a lot of money out of that house today, because they rescued me. And then I got back in the carriage and we crossed the ferry there at Georgetown, and I got to the other side of the Potomac River, and that's when I said, stop the carriage. I got out and I had a little meltdown for about 2 minutes, cried my eyes out, and I said, where is Mr. Madison? Then I got back in the carriage and we took off to a home there in the Virginia countryside where I would be kept safe, and the next day Mr. Madison found me, and we were reunited. But in the meantime, the British had come in, just as they said they were going to do. They burned down the Capitol, they burned down the White House, but before they burned down the White House, of course, you realize I had a dinner party set on the table for 40 people, thinking my husband was coming back. All the beautiful liqueurs and wines were on the table, beautiful dinner places set there for them. And so Cockburn had a wonderful meal, and they played with my husband's cockade cap, and they took off with it. They took off with his walking stick. And it was Cockburn himself who said, ah, Mrs. Madison made these beautiful little embroidered seats around the dining room table. I'm going to sit on her seat, and I'm going to keep this beautiful little cushion for my souvenir of Mrs. Madison. And so that's what he did. And then he ushered everyone out of the house. He said, light the fires, take all of Latrobe's beautiful Federalist furniture, all that Roman-style furniture, French things all over the house, put it in the pile and burn it. And that's exactly what he did. And you would look for ages around the city. For miles and miles, you could see the flames of the Capitol and the White House burning. And the next day, I said, oh, what confusion, what sadness. I would like to take the British and put them in a pit of hell, is what I said. And that is the only time I ever swore in my life. And if you can believe that, you can believe anything. Well, the most amazing thing was our soldiers there at the Naval Yard decided to burn up all the ammunition there so that the British couldn't get it. And it caused a huge explosion. And British were killed there and Americans were killed there. And that was a sad thing that happened, of course. But it was Mr. Jennings who said, oh, Mrs. Madison, I know you'll make Washington, D.C. happen again. I said, yes, I will. And so I decided to go back to the city, and I would be the one who would help to revive the city. And when Congress wanted to move us back to Philadelphia, because Independence Hall looked quite good at this time, I would go around with my calling card and say, no, no, no. We would be humiliating ourselves if the British found out that we let them destroy our capital and we never came back to rebuild it. And so we decided, it was a very close vote, by 9 votes, we got this council, or I should say the Congress, to decide to stay there in Washington, D.C. That was the good news. Washington would be rebuilt to the grand edifice that it is today. And then when the British went to Baltimore, you know what happened there. Get out your music. We're going to end this show today with some of the joy and the excitement and some of the successes that happened because we won the battle there in Baltimore. And we are going to do the beautiful Star-Spangled Banner. It is, oh, you're leaving. You don't like patriotic. Francis Scott Key boarded a British war. Goodbye and thank you for coming today. The British warship in Chesapeake Bay. He was on a British ship at the time to help a prisoner there that was one of our prisoners, and he got stuck on the ship when the fighting started, and he, the next day, looked up and there was that flag flying, and he wrote this poem that became our national anthem. We're all going to sing it together. The Star Spangled Banner. We're going to start it again. Ready? Which lasted for 2 whole years. And Mr. Madison, they always called it Mr. Madison's War when they were angry at him. Oh, he started this war. But now, everyone was elated that the President of the United States, James Madison, had saved the day, and we became more American than we had ever become at any other time in history. Now, we have a unified country. You know, when the British burned us down in Washington, D.C., that made the rest of the country so mad that it unified us as a whole. When we have problems in this country, when we stand together, that's when we're strong. When we divide, a divided house cannot stand. We must be one house, one union, and that's what Madison prayed for at the very end of his life. This little song we'll do next. When we went back to beautiful, beautiful Montpelier after we left the White House, I have to tell you, we were there for many, many years, and Mr. Madison put all of his papers together, and all of the notes from the meetings, putting the Constitution together. He had all those notes. He had 23 volumes of papers toward the end of his life, and I helped him to edit those, if you can imagine. And because of all those papers and all that he stood for, he said, oh, that we would never be divided. He didn't know the Civil War was around the country. And I pray to God that this country is not foolish enough to have another Civil War, but will realize the millions of people that have died for this country, bled for this country. That's why the red is on the flag, for the blood of the people who have died for this country. Please remember that. Please talk to people please let them know, you may not be happy today, but tomorrow you will be happier. I say no more. We become political. I mustn't become political. We're going to get out a little song now because, you know, Mr. Madison would pass away at 85 years old there at Montpelier. And when he did, it was a sad time. I couldn't even go to his funeral. And his little obelisk was there in the cemetery, there in Montpelier. I just couldn't go. He was the greatest man I would ever know in my life. He was my counselor, my protector, my rest. Let's do this little song together, and in the middle part, I will read what happened to my beloved on the last day that he lived. And then we will do the last verse together. First verse, and then I'll talk, and then the last verse. America the Beautiful. I would leave Montpelier a year later and go back to Washington, D.C. for the last 16 years of my life. I would live in a little house right near Lafayette Square. And by the way, Lafayette came to my house in Montpelier. I was so happy to entertain you 25 years after the Revolutionary War. But there I would be near the White House again. And I would see various presidents come and go, 11 of them all come, and the last one was President Cohen. And you will see that when I went back to Washington, D.C., they treated me like the Queen again. Queen Dolley, they called me, Queen Dolley. And I was invited to the White House many times with President Polk and his wife. And I was so happy to be a part of this great country. Imagine a little girl with the American Revolutionary War, the first president of the United States, and then 11 presidents later. I was still alive, and so when Matthew Brady took my picture next to President Polk, I'm a blur in the background because I'm. He would get other portraits of me, but sadly enough, I was wearing an old turban and the same dress and the same shawl in every picture. It was Paul Jennings who would come to my house and bring a basket of food because they said I was living in furious times. I was living in poverty, all because of the wonderful son that I gave birth to, John K. Todd. There was a congressman that said, Mr. Todd was to Montpelier what the serpent was to the Garden of Eden. I lost Montpelier because I had to pay his debts of gambling and drinking and carousing, and he never announced it. They say he died 2 years after I did, completely deranged. And I would recommend that as a grandparent or a parent, that you discipline your children more. I was too appeasing. I was good for the Congress, but I was not good for my son growing up. And so people would bring food to the house. All days was for a short time purchased by Mr. Webster himself. Daniel Webster, that is. And then he bought his own freedom and with his own money. With his own money, he bought food to feed me. That's how it was. So when the Congress found out what was going on in my life, they said, we will buy all Mr. Madison's papers for $20,000, but we're going to put it in a trust fund and give it to you a little at a time. That made my son so angry. He said, I'm going to go up to D.C. and I'm going to march on the Congress and I'm going to shoot every one of them. And I wrote back to him, I said, 5 years ago, do not think of departing and separating me from my last gift in this life, and that's my friends, the Congress, the representatives in the Senate. Don't you dare do that. I have nothing more to say to you, is what I finally told him. So the very last year of my life, I had a little bit of money to live on. And they say that my beautiful grandniece took care of me, my great niece. Lucia Payne Cutts was her name. And she loved me so much, she wrote a book about me, the first biography about me. And she was there at my bedside the last 2 days of my life, and they said I suffered a stroke, but you wouldn't have known it. I just couldn't get out of bed, but I still had a smile on my face. And I would call out, my counselor, oh my counselor, where are you? I have so much to ask you. I'm looking forward to seeing you, my counselor. That was Jimmy. And then my son came to my bedside too, and I said, oh, my poor boy, my poor boy. And so when I passed away, they said my funeral was the grandest funeral that had ever taken place in Washington, D.C. up to that time. I was now an Episcopalian, and hundreds and thousands of people lined by my little coffin and gave their respects to the woman that they said was the last great institution in the United States. Well, if you just live every day as unto God and you do the right thing, things will work out. Always do. Never do the wrong thing. And you will be given honor at the end of your life. And yes, my friends, I even know now that I'm up there with Jimmy, that the red velvet curtains were made into that beautiful red dress there. So there's still hope for my red velvet curtains. That is for sure. Well, my dears, you may come up here and look at the books and the photographs and the things and the parchments of our original Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And when you do it, please know that you hold the greatest country in the world in your hand. You have no idea how many people would love to be sitting where you are now, to be called a part of the United States of America. And today I want to thank you for being such a gracious audience despite the heat, despite the trains. And I want you to hold those programs up. You see those programs in your hands? They were created played by Francis Zeller, and that is the most beautiful program that Van Ann Moore has ever seen to honor Dolley Madison. That is your souvenir today. We thank her and the wonderful Harvey House ladies for hosting you today, and for the wonderful Harvey House for being so gracious as to bring us in to learn a little bit more about our wonderful country and the First Lady. Let us all sing this song together. Some people say that even though this was written so many years ago, it was only in this century that many people said this should be our national anthem. Isn't it a beautiful song? It is called God Bless America. It's one of my favorite songs now that I know it, but I didn't know it at the time. Irving Berlin wrote it in 1918, right after your